My name's Abigail, and I turned 17 just yesterday. Since my father died, I've met many unfortunate incidents and traumas due to my drunkard mom's negligence. But having my brother Ethan there in that adversity through thick and thin eased some of the troubles. Mom never cared about us. She never even bothered to ask if we had eaten for the day or not. It was like we didn't matter to her, and she was the only one tormented by Dad's death. I don't remember clearly when and how we grew up like this, but before I knew it, I turned 17 and was asking my brother to give me the allowance money for the week. Mom stopped giving us money at some point, and Ethan started working at petty part-time jobs. Fortunately, she still provided us with education and hasn't kicked us out yet. Guess she did not forget that we came out of her womb. Her cold behaviors used to hurt us whenever we saw other kids receiving warmth from their mothers, but we've learned to ignore it nonetheless. I wasn't even surprised when she didn't remember my birthday this year either. But some of my friends seemed to enjoy making fun of my mom's ignorance toward us, so I was a bit annoyed. Ethan prepared a little birthday dinner just for the two of us at my favorite restaurant. I ordered all my favorite dishes, and everything was going fun. Despite knowing that my brother might have used up most of his savings to bring me to this fancy place for my birthday, I truly loved it, oblivious to the threat lurking around us. I excused myself for a bit to use the restroom, and as I was walking past a few other tables, I couldn't help but turn as I felt someone's persistent stare stinging my back, only to notice two men looking in my direction. It felt awkward and creepy, so I turned back and continued to walk to the restroom. As I was leaving the restroom area, I noticed the same men standing outside the men's room, and since I had to pass through that, I could not avoid them. I hesitated for a few seconds, but then I tried my best to put on a poker face and walked past them like a scalded cat. It was a relief that they didn't do anything, but as I walked back to my table, I could still feel their gaze on my back. Ethan smiled as he saw me coming in his direction, and as I reached there, he asked, "Is there anything else you'd like to eat?" His warmth and care always melt my worry away. So I smiled back and shook my head no. I think we should go home now. He looked at me with a concerned expression while asking, "Why? Did you not like it?" "No, brother, don't get me wrong. Everything was amazing. I enjoyed it, but don't you think it's getting late?" He looked at his wristwatch as I said that, and I knew the only reason he wanted to stay longer was to avoid Mom on such a joyful occasion. But since I felt uneasy staying at this place any longer, I did not take no for an answer. "Fine, but let's stop for ice cream on the way home," he said as he called the waiter over for the check. I swear at times like this, I feel like he's the younger sibling and not me. I still love him to death. After paying, we exited the restaurant and walked toward the subway station. But for some reason, I was still having the feeling of being watched. I turned around, and there was no one, so I thought I was mistaken. "Abe, I think someone's following us." When Ethan said that, the faces of those two men flashed in my mind, making me tremble at the thought that if they were to do anything, none of us had the strength to fight back, since it wasn't just me whose body was fragile. I looked at Ethan as he squeezed my hands, trying to assure me nothing wrong could happen. But as we took a few steps further, a car stopped before us, and we were pulled inside. "Kevin, you idiot! Why did you grab the boy when we only needed the girl?" One of those men shouted at the other as they tied us while we struggled forcefully. "But brother, who would bring us the ransom money if we let go of the boy?" The other one replied. "Forget it. Let's go." They tied us to the back seat and started driving the car. "Now, you shithead, if you don't want to die, you would give us the money we want. Understand?" He pointed a gun at Ethan while saying that, and he shook his head vigorously. tell he was just as frightened as I was. They drove somewhere for 2 hours when one of them said he needed to pee. The other one looked annoyed, but asked him to hold it till they reached the travel stop. My mind was in a haze, and I couldn't think straight as I continued to panic. And even in that situation, I knew I was pale as death. After about half an hour, we reached a love stop where they parked the car outside. They took out the gun and held it behind our waists, as one of them said, "Don't even think about trying to act over smart while you're here, if you don't want the girl to die, that is." Ethan again nodded nervously before asking, "Can I at least use the restroom?" The man looked at him suspiciously and said, "Fine, but give me everything you have with you." The other man checked his pockets and took his wallet, watch, and phone. We then headed inside, and they somehow got in with their guns without anyone noticing it. Amidst being terrified, I continued to hope for someone to see us and we could get away from them. But I don't think luck was on our side. The bossy one led me to the Del Taco and headed to the last corner seat to wait for Ethan and the other man. And as we sat there, he continued to scan me from head to toe. I could feel the lust dripping from his teeth, making me shiver at the thought of him trying something with me. About 15 minutes later, the two of them returned. "Took you long enough. If we get caught, I will shoot you too," the man sitting with me said while gritting his teeth in annoyance. "It's not my fault, brother. He was taking a crap in there," he said, as they sat on the table next to us, still sticking to our sides. That was when I noticed a man entering the Del Taco. He ordered something, then sat at a distance of 4 seats from us. Those men didn't want to cause suspicions, so they tried to put up an act of looking at the menu, and a few minutes later, I felt the man looking in our direction. "I think he's getting suspicious of us. Let's go now," one of the men said, signaling us to get up. My wishes for the man to stop us went in vain as I noticed no one following us. I didn't blame him. He must have thought we all were together like a friend group or something. We were forced back inside the car, and this time they made me sit in the front with that man who was eyeing me like a hungry hyena, while Ethan was in the back seat at the gunpoint of the other man. I knew that even if either of us tried to fight back or struggle, they would be much quicker than us, so it was better than we do as they say until we get a chance to escape. And Ethan must be thinking the same. The only problem was that, while I knew they wanted money, I had no idea what they planned to do with us and how they thought of getting it. If they gave Mom an anonymous call, she would tell them to do whatever they wanted with us instead of giving them the money. While I was thinking all this, the car stopped suddenly in the middle of nowhere. I turned to look at the man sitting next to me, but judging by his irritated expression, the engine must have turned off on its own. The man asked the Kevin guy to go and check what was going on, and as they went to check, he put his hand on my inner thigh with a disgusting grin on his face. I wanted to scream, but I was scared they might kill Ethan, so I continued to look ahead as tears formed in my eyes and started falling off on their own. His hands proceeded further up when a muffling sound made me flinch at the thought of something happening to Ethan. I pushed the guy with all my might, opened the car door, and ran outside to see. My sudden act took aback the guy, but he instantly got it together and ran after me, only to find me frozen at the sight of his fellow's body lying on the ground, while Ethan was nowhere to be seen. I didn't want to, but I still hesitantly turned to see the enraged look on that man's face as he stared at his brother's corpse. My mind kept telling me to run, so I ran, but he grabbed my hair in a matter of minutes. He pinned me down on the ground and ripped the lower hem of my dress. But before he could do anything else, I saw Ethan sneaking up on him and hitting his head with the bloody wrench he had. The man didn't seem to be fazed by that hit, but as he was about to turn, a couple of hits followed the first one, making him fall to the ground. I had never seen such a ghastly look on my brother's face as I saw blood splattering on his face and body while he punctured the man's head. He looked more frightening than any monster or devil I had ever imagined, making me shudder with horror. Even after the man died, he continued to hit him, which was now shifted from his head to his stomach. He repeatedly screamed as he tore open his guts, "You dare touch my baby sister with your filthy hands!" When finally done, he stepped back in horror as he realized his ruthless act. He stopped near the car tire, and it was as if his legs gave up when he squatted down with that cold, terrifying look on his face. I stared at the bodies of the two men. For some reason, my mind was at ease that they couldn't do anything terrible. But all the same, I was scared to death by the consequences of these murders. That was when I noticed the truck that had stopped at a distance, and I could tell it was the same man we saw at the travel stop. I couldn't help but feel bitter by looking at him, thinking that if he had helped us back then, nothing would have happened, despite knowing nothing was his fault. Ethan noticed me looking at him and followed my gaze, but the man's face turned pale as he saw my brother. He started his truck and drove away. I didn't want anyone else to notice us, so I got up and started dragging bodies to put them inside the car before anyone else showed up. Luckily, I found some water bottles inside their vehicle and a spare set of clothes, so I tried my best to wash off the blood on Ethan's body, while he continued looking at me in a daze. I asked him to change while I thought of something to cover this up. Noticing the trail of leaked fuel on the road, I remembered I saw one of them smoking, so I searched for a lighter inside the car and found it. After setting the car on fire, we didn't look back and continued walking, hoping to hitchhike. We knew we would get caught eventually, and if any of the working security cameras captured us in the act, we would indeed get arrested. So once we reached home, we planned to grab our things and run away somewhere else. That is, if we don't get caught before then.
The night was pitch black, and the rain was pouring down heavily outside. I found myself alone at home, looking for something exciting to do. With my love for the paranormal, I decided to watch one of the scariest Hollywood movies, The Conjuring. My friends had dared me to watch it alone at midnight, and I had accepted the challenge. The movie was approaching a horror scene when I realized that my popcorn was finished. So I went into the kitchen to make some more. As I was in the middle of making the popcorn, I suddenly heard a blood-curdling scream that pierced through the silence and reverberated through the entire house. The scream sounded like it came from just outside the kitchen, startling me to the core. My heart raced, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. I couldn't help but wonder what was outside the kitchen, waiting for me in the dark. As I walked into the dining room, my eyes were immediately drawn to the laptop sitting on the table. The eerie glow of the screen illuminated the room, casting strange shadows on the furniture. I approached the table, feeling a sense of unease as I realized that the movie I had been watching was still playing. I must have absentmindedly brought it with me and forgotten to pause it. I took a deep breath and reached out to hit the pause button, but my relief was short-lived when I realized the movie was still playing. The scene that greeted me was enough to make my skin crawl. A ghostly figure perched on top of the wardrobe, pouncing on one of the girls. The hair on the back of my neck stood up as I watched the scene unfold, feeling a sense of dread creep over me. My heart was racing, and my palms were sweating as I frantically hit the pause button, but the movie continued to play. After a few attempts, I finally managed to pause it on a scene that sent shivers down my spine. It had been a long time since I watched a horror movie alone. I never felt this scared before, and I couldn't understand why I felt an overwhelming sense of fear. As I turned to go to the kitchen to grab my popcorn, I was suddenly overcome by the voice of the next scene, which echoed through the house. I hesitated, feeling a sense of trepidation as I turned to face the dining room where the voice was coming from. My steps faltered as I approached the door of the room again. My heart was pounding in my chest, and my legs trembled with fear. I couldn't fathom why this was happening to me. Was my laptop malfunctioning and causing the movie to glitch? Or was something more sinister at play? I couldn't shake off the unease that had settled on me like a heavy cloak. As I reached for the doorknob, I closed my eyes and whispered a prayer, hoping beyond hope that what I was about to witness was just an issue with the movie and not something paranormal. As I approached the laptop, the flickering light from the screen illuminated the room, casting eerie shadows on the walls. The scene that unfolded before my eyes was one of the ghostly figures haunting the group of girls, their pale faces twisted in agony. The haunting presence sent shivers down my spine as I drew closer, my fingers trembling with trepidation. While reaching for the power button, my heart pounded in my chest, and my breath caught in my throat. I inhaled deeply as I steeled myself and pressed the button. The silence that followed seemed almost deafening. Carefully, I picked up the laptop, feeling its weight in my hands, walked to my room and placed it back in its bag. The experience had left me feeling drained and unsettled, the haunting images still fresh in my mind. Not even the thought of food could settle my nerves, so I decided to retire for the night, hoping for a peaceful sleep. I was on the verge of drifting off to sleep when the sound of water flowing from the bathroom startled me. The resonance of the running water reverberated through my ears and caused my heart to race with fear. I felt a sense of apprehension rise within me as I peered toward the source of the sound with wide eyes. The sound grew louder and more persistent, causing my anxiety to escalate. Regardless, I knew I had no other option but to investigate the noise source and turn it off. With shaky legs, I reluctantly got out of bed and walked towards the bathroom. The sound of the water grew louder as I neared the shower area. My heart was pounding so hard that I could feel it in my ears as I extended my hand hesitantly to draw back the shower curtain. When I drew the curtain back, a sense of dread washed over me as I realized that the shower wasn't running. Instead, only a few droplets trickled out, creating a soft clinking sound. My body started to tremble uncontrollably as I tried turning the knob as tightly as possible to prevent further leakage. I was struggling to comprehend why so many inexplicable and eerie occurrences were happening around me when I had never encountered anything like this before. It was as if the fabric of reality had been torn apart as multiple paranormal activities had unfolded before my eyes. As someone who had always been drawn to the thrill of watching Hollywood horror movies, I had never experienced anything that came close to that level of fear or unease. It felt like I was a character in one of those movies, except that it was all too real this time. Was my new apartment the site of some dark and evil energy? Or was something else at work? I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was very, very wrong. My heart racing, I suddenly jolted awake in my bed, my mind still caught in the grip of that terrifying nightmare. As I looked around the room trying to get my bearings, I noticed the movie's end credits playing on my laptop screen. I realized I had fallen asleep while watching it. Taking a deep breath and feeling a sense of relief wash over me, I quickly shut down the computer and reached for the jug of water on my nightstand, hoping to calm my nerves and steady my shaking hands.
I am now a 72-year-old man. This happened long ago, but I remember it so well. The background was a series of events that placed me in a mountain cabin outside of Frederick, Maryland, circa 1969 or 1970. Just say my life at the time was in disarray. I had dropped out of college, my father had died very badly, and I was alienated. I needed to get my mind right. The opportunity to move to an isolated cabin, to live in contemplation and solitude was welcome. I had some inheritance money to pay for it. To the best of my memory, I was there 8 to 9 months. No TV, but books and radio. I had a library card, and I can't remember if I even had a phone. The story begins when, a month into my stay, a female beagle showed up at my door. She was a lost dog, and I took her in. Never could train her to do anything, but I fed her, and she was a sweet, if not the brightest, dog. A few months in, I began to feel a presence around the isolated cabin. Hard to describe, but I felt like someone was watching. On many occasions, I thought someone might even be looking into my cabin window, watching us. The next phase was the shadowing or following. I knew the folks a half-mile down the lane, woods all around, and would sometimes visit them at night. Something was waiting for me, and followed closely in the woods beside me in the darkness. You could hear it easily, footsteps in the woods, and it picked up its pace as I did. This not only happened to me, but to my younger brother who visited, and to friends, and it spooked them big time. At night, it was out there around the cabin. And here's the funny thing. I was never afraid, never felt threatened. Not at all, at least early on. There was no feeling of malevolence. I spent a good bit of time wandering the vast areas of woodlands around me. There was a state park just up the hill, and the Frederick Municipal Forest went on for mile after mile. The whole of western Maryland was much more country than it is now. None of the development had set in yet. In our hikes, the dog and I, we came across evidence of campsites, recent ones in the woods, traces of fires, old abandoned buildings that had corners that gave shelter and looked slept in, garbage, food and drink, paper, what have you. Perhaps hunters, but much of it did not have the organized feel that you would get from experienced hunters. The last month of my stay there was when things intensified. Maybe he sensed I was preparing to leave. In the mornings, I would find small dead animals at the bottom of the front porch steps. The cabin had a small front porch screened with a light door and 4 wooden steps to the ground. A spotlight would illuminate the long front yard with woods close by either side. Dead animals began to appear at the bottom of the steps many mornings. I remember small birds, then a squirrel, a rabbit, even a weasel one day, like they were offerings. I had to grab them up before the dog ate them, and this went on almost daily for several weeks. One night, very late, I was awoken by some sound. I lay in bed and heard something from the front porch. I hopped up and hit the lights, and I saw that hound dog who never learned to sit or stay, standing at the front door in a perfect pointer position. She was shaking in fear. She never barked. I heard the door slam and footsteps down the steps. I hit the spotlight but saw nothing. I went out. He had been on the porch at my front door, maybe trying to enter. After that, I stayed in at night more and more. The animal offerings got bigger and bigger. Larger birds, a possum, a woodchuck. It really wasn't funny. The final 2 gifts were legs, either from horses or even cows. Big and bloody. One was skinned, dear God. And the second to last day, the dog left me. I could hear her in the woods howling on a trail following a scent. I looked for her in every way I could. Came up in the following weeks, but to no avail. She left as she came. I moved back to Maryland's suburbs of D.C., got an apartment with a friend, got a job, and moved on with my life. One day not long after, I picked up the Washington Post, and there was an article about recent encounters with the Sykesville monster. It's described as a tall, yeti-like creature, fur-covered, on 2 legs that would pick out a family or person and give them attention. I wasn't the only one. That attention, described in the article, was exactly what had happened to me. Following you at night, looking inside the house, gifts, and so on. I was shocked. If I had turned on that spotlight and seen a Bigfoot or Yeti, I might still be running. But I think I know who it was. Sykesville, Maryland was the location of the Springfield Hospital Center, a large state psychiatric hospital. It was 20 miles or so east of Frederick, and back then, many folks knew how to live in the woods. They grew up that way, country folks. I think the monster was actually an escaped patient, or just a free schizophrenic who lived outside. This is like all the homeless you see in the cities now, probably off his meds, but somehow functional and just lonely. He would pick people or families to adopt, so to speak. The camps in the woods could have been him. Nothing to do, he would make mischief. I think he liked me, but sensed that I was leaving. Now, I can't prove any of this, it's just my theory. My monster was very much of that time and place, and his behavior was what I noticed in nearly every case then. I don't think he could have survived until the 1980s. Deinstitutionalization of mental hospitals threw the mentally ill out into the streets and took away the shelter of hospitals. Unprotected, the mentally ill do die. But once in a while, they find their way to you.
Hey guys, thanks so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so.
I used to work in a Pizza Hut when I was in high school. I have a bunch of weird stories from working there, but this one, oh, it scared me the most. My Pizza Hut was the kind where you can only pick up the food, and there was a wall between the storefront and the kitchen of the store. So if you were in the front, you were pretty much on your own. The store itself is located at an out-of-way dead shopping center. And oh, this was Atlantic City. This should tell you a lot about our clients. For some reason, I always got stuck on the late shift despite being in high school. So, for most weekdays, it would be just me and one other cook in the store, past 10 p.m., twiddling our thumbs. I would hang out at the front, and the cook would wait in the kitchen, out of earshot. One night, I was hanging behind the counter, and I see a guy walk past. Didn't think much of it, and went back to doing nothing, waiting for my shift to end. Then the door of the shop opens, and it's the same guy that walked by. He is tall, but is thin like a skeleton, and there was something not right about his eyes. But despite him putting me on edge, I get up, greet him, and ask him what he would like to order. Nothing. He just stands in front of me, staring at the ceiling, muttering to himself. I was only 17, and for the most part a good kid despite living in Atlantic City, so I didn't know what to make of it. Now, I would probably chalk it up to drugs. Anyways, he is standing there making up impressions and muttering in what looks like tongues. Then he abruptly spins around and walks out of the store without even acknowledging that I exist. At this point, I am unnerved, but I shake it off and sit down. My shift was about to end, and I was counting down the minutes when I realized that somebody had walked in. I look up, and it's the same guy with the same creepy eyes, only this time he is holding a phone to his ear and muttering intelligibly. I realize that he is not talking to anyone, and he was staring at me super intensely. At this point, I am getting frightened. He just keeps looking at me, and so I ask if I can help him. He starts walking towards the counter, still looking at me. Then he suddenly asked in a perfectly normal voice if his order was ready. And I was going, what the fuck? At this time, and I'm not sure how to answer, so I go with the truth and told him honestly that he did not order anything when he was in the first time. He gets this bugged-eye look and lunges at the counter, and I jump back. My heart was pounding at this point. This guy is not sane, and he is going to pull out a knife and stab me. Then just as absurdly, he lunged. He yelled, "God damn it!" and looked as if he was going to cry. He puts his head in his hands and starts pulling at his hair. I started feeling bad for this guy and asked politely and nicely if he maybe wants to order something now, and his head just snaps back up and his expression is completely blank. He looks deranged. I am holding still because I am afraid that moving will set him off. Then, thankfully, the door to the store opens and a huge man walks in. He looks at the guy, kind of confused, and realizes that something was not right with him. The crazy guy looks at him, and looks at me, and starts backing up until he's out of the door. He starts walking to the edge of the storefront, looking at me the whole time, and then goes past the edge of the door, and now he's gone. The other guy looked at me and asked, "What the hell was that?" And I just said that I had no idea at all and thought the guy was crazy. I tried to shake it off, but I was totally on edge for the rest of my shift. When I clocked out that night, I made one of the drivers walk out with me. Then I jumped into my car and got the hell out of there. I never saw that dude again, but it was a really strange and unnerving experience. I don't know what he would have done if that guy had not walked in when he did.